Welcome to episode 67 of Tales from the Hangman's Record. The stories featured in these videos are all taken from cases in my 3-volume series of books, The Hangman's Record 1868 to 1964, copies of which are available from my website stevefielding.com. Please press like and subscribe to the channel if you enjoy this presentation, and any donations to help offset the running costs are much appreciated and can be made by clicking the thanks link below or via PayPal using the link paypal.me/thehangmansrecord. Your comments and suggestions on whether you believe justice was done in this case and for future episodes in this series and on my other channel, Crime Casebook, are always welcome. Today's tale takes us back to New Year's Eve 1934 in the northeast of England, and the case of an elderly man callously robbed and murdered in his own home a few hours before the chimes rang in the new year. The killer was quickly apprehended, and despite his protestations of innocence, and with evidence being later presented to suggest he may have been telling the truth, he was led to the gallows on a warm spring morning. "Let's play a game of murder," Helen Wright said to guests at the house party at Gateshead in the northeast of England. The pretty barmaid dealt the playing cards to a group of friends and laughed as her soldier fiancé Steve drew the ace of spades. "You're the murderer," she declared. The friends put him in the witness box, and as they drank the bottled beer, began to ask questions. "Where were you at the time of the crime?" one asked. Steve smiled. "On the stairs playing my ukulele," he answered, joining in with their laughter. He showed no signs of emotion or distress. He was calm, self-possessed and good-humoured. It was, after all, just one of several party games they played that night as they saw out the old year. As the chimes of midnight sounded, Helen sat on Steve's knee. They kissed as he slipped an engagement ring onto her finger and wished each other a happy new year. It was not to be. It was Monday, 31st of December 1934, and celebrations to welcome in 1935 were well away throughout all parts of the country, and none more so than in Bishop Auckland, some 25 miles inland to the west of Hartlepool on the northeast coast of England. At shortly before 10 o'clock, Jane Herdman finished her late night shopping and caught the omnibus home to see in the new year with her aged father, 75-year-old solicitor's clerk, coin collector and well-known local historian Edward Fredrick Herdman. Returning to their home in Salisbury Place, she was surprised to find the door locked, and fearing he may have had a seizure or a fall, she managed to gain entry through an open window at the back of the house. Her fears that something were amiss were soon confirmed, but in a far more horrifying way than she had imagined. Lying on the dining room floor was the body of her father. It was clear he had not collapsed through a seizure, as even a cursory glance could see he had been savagely beaten and his throat had been cut. A blood-stained silver penknife lay on the body, and close by was a heavy brass poker, covered in blood and which the head had been broken off. She ran it into the street, and her cries alerted neighbours at an adjacent party, one of whom quickly called the police. Superintendent Herdman, his sergeant and several other officers from Durham Constabulary arrived at the scene and began a murder investigation. They quickly ascertained that a number of things didn't add up. Drawers upstairs had been ransacked, and the daughter confirmed that money was missing from the house, yet the dead man's blood-stained wallet, which the killer had removed from his pocket, presumably after the attack, was found on the dining table. Inside it contained £40. In another pocket the police found another large wad of pound notes. If, as it seemed, robbery was the motive, why had the killer not taken the money from the wallet and the man's pocket? The detective also considered the killer's method of entry into the house. Jane Herdman confirmed all the doors were closed and locked, and so it seemed clear that the old man had invited his murderer into the house. This, they reasoned, meant he was someone well known to the victim. They quickly had a prime suspect. John Stephenson Bainbridge, known to his friends as Steve, was a 26-year-old neighbour of the murdered man and had been at the house earlier in the evening. He was a soldier home on leave from his unit and had been a regular visit to the house a few doors down from his mother's almost every day since returning to Bishop Auckland. Jane Herdman told the police she thought he was short of money. Within hours, Bainbridge was traced to the perch in Gateshead and taken to the local police station for questioning. He denied any involvement in the crime, but when bloodstains were found on his shirt cuff, he was arrested on suspicion and held in custody as investigations continued. Bainbridge was a private in the 1st Battalion, Durham Light Infantry, based at Blackdown Camp in Hampshire. Before he enlisted in the army, he had worked as a junior clerk for G.W. Jennings, the same firm of solicitors where Edward Herdman worked as a managing clerk, before he was dismissed for theft and sentenced to a term of imprisonment. His appeal against the sentence was successful, as it was felt the loss of his promising career as a solicitor's clerk was punishment enough for his crime. The families were neighbours and well known to each other, but although they lived on the same street, they lived in very different circumstances. Herdman, now retired, lived a comfortable existence, while at number 25, Bainbridge lived with his widowed mother in a far more humble situation. The family was often in debt and frequently had to use a local money lender for loans. On Saturday 22nd of December 1934, Bainbridge returned to Bishop Auckland on Christmas leave. He visited Herdman several times, initially bringing with him a number of regimental cap badges to add to his collection, and when Bainbridge mentioned his regiment may be due a posting to the Saar in Germany, and with the growth of the Nazi Party was now a volatile area, and the old man suggested he made a will. Bainbridge decided it was a good idea, and on Monday morning the 31st of December he purchased a will from a local stationery shop. At 12:30 that afternoon, Bainbridge called on Herdman and asked him to draft the will for him. Later that evening, Bainbridge called again to see how things were progressing, and when Jane Herdman left the house at 10 minutes to 8 to go buy some snuff for her father and grab a few groceries, Bainbridge exited with her and they walked together towards her bus stop. A local pathologist had determined that the time of death was somewhere between 8 and 10 o'clock, and detectives questioned Bainbridge over his movements at this time. He told them he had returned home after leaving Herdman's house in the company of his daughter. His mother confirmed this and added that while they were talking, she heard the clock strike 8 o'clock. After a wash and brush up, Bainbridge left soon afterwards, telling his mother he was going to meet his fiancée, Helen Wright, at the Queen's Head Hotel, where she was working as a barmaid, and that they were then going on to a party in Gateshead. She said her son had been short of money and had given him £5 earlier that day. Investigations found that Bainbridge had been seen at the back of the house shortly after 8 o'clock. A man in a motor car had spotted someone in the headlights and asked if there was an exit at the bottom of the back street. He claimed the person he had spoken to was Bainbridge, who he knew from seeing regularly around town. Bainbridge was then known to have called into a jeweller's shop at around 8:20, where he paid the last instalment on an engagement ring and bought a pair of earrings and a small trinket. He then caught a bus to the Queen's Head, where he spent the rest of the evening with his fiancée before they caught another bus at closing time to Gateshead and the party, where the police picked him up on the following morning. Detectives learned that Bainbridge had been short of money before Christmas and that he had borrowed £18 from a moneylender and had failed in a request to borrow more money from the same man. It was found that during the course of the evening, Bainbridge had changed a number of pound notes and still had 2 in his wallet. Asked how he had obtained the money, Bainbridge claimed he had borrowed it from a married woman but refused to name her. He was to stick to this story throughout his trial. Then, on the 3rd of January 1935, Private John McNally, a soldier at Blackdown Camp, received an envelope postmarked Gateshead, 1st of January 1935. It contained £35 notes and 2 10-shilling notes, a number of which were blood-stained. There was no letter inside, but the writing on the envelope was similar to that of Bainbridge's, found on the draft of his will at the dead man's house. Satisfied that John Bainbridge was the killer, Superintendent Herdman charged him with wilful murder. John Stephenson Steve Bainbridge's trial began at Durham Assizes before Mr Justice Goddard on Monday the 4th of March 1935. He pleaded not guilty. Leading for the prosecution, Mr. Paley Scott said the evidence against the accused was in the main circumstantial. He was short of money before the murder and soon after it had money in his possession, money he claimed was a loan from a woman whose identity he refused to reveal. Bainbridge was known to have bought a drink at the Queen's Arms Hotel, paid for it with a pound note, which was one of a sequence that matched those he denied sending to a comrade at the army camp. Bloodstains on the note were the same as that of the victim and the same group as stains on Bainbridge's shirt cuff. Evidence of the handwriting on the will and the envelope containing the money took up the whole third day of the trial. Leading for the defence, Mr. Russell Vick said that Bainbridge had left the house with the victim's daughter and after visiting his mother, he had first called to the Queen's Hotel and then at closing time they had caught a bus together to the party at Gateshead. They mentioned the party games they had played that evening, including one called Buttons, which involved guests undoing buttons on their clothes if they answered a question incorrectly. During the game, Bainbridge had taken off his shirt and his fiancée testified that she didn't see any traces of blood on his clothes. The crux of the case, the prosecution claimed, was that there was a 10-minute window in Bainbridge's alibi from leaving the house and for speaking to his mother. This, they alleged, was ample time to return to the house, commit the murder and steal the money he needed to settle his debts, pay the final instalments on the engagement ring and a little extra to pay for drinks in Gateshead. His fiancée also testified that in the early hours of the morning he had left the house to get some fresh air. This, the prosecution claimed, was when he had posted the letter with the money to the army camp. Everything revolved around the time after he left the house in the company of Herdman's daughter, visited his mother and then was seen at the jeweller's paying for the engagement ring. Piecing the times together, there was a gap of 10 minutes. Closing for the defence, Russell Vick questioned whether the small gap in the alibi was enough time to commit the murder, as the prosecution had alleged, telling the jury that if they have doubts, they cannot find Bainbridge guilty. The trial was to last 4 days. Summing up, the judge asked if making the will was just a blind or an excuse for the prisoner to be in the house. Mr. Justice Goddard, in passing sentence, said that after a patient trial, the jury had found the prisoner guilty of murder of the old man who he had murdered for the sake of his money. The jury made no recommendation to mercy. Bainbridge was taken from the dock into a room below the court where he was told to undress. A blanket was laid in the middle of the floor and he was told to stand on it, fully naked, while a thorough body search took place, including combing his hair to make sure he had nothing secreted about him that would allow him to cheat the hangman. He was then issued with a prison uniform and escorted from the court into the condemned cell in the adjacent Durham jail. John Bainbridge was sentenced to be hanged on Tuesday the 26th of March, and hangman Tom Pierpont and his assistant Henry Pollard were engaged. He immediately launched an appeal against the sentence, which was heard in London before a trio of High Court judges comprising of the Lord Chief Justice Hewitt, Mr. Justice Humphreys and Mr. Justice Avery. 83-year-old Sir Horace Avery was sitting in his last murder trial, passing away from heart failure and pernicious anemia just a few weeks later. Bainbridge's appeal that the trial judge had misdirected the jury was dismissed on Monday the 5th of April. Bainbridge stood firm, with shoulders squared, head erect, as he took the news calmly that he had lost his appeal. As he was ushered out of the court, his mother sat at the back of the room, crying bitterly for some minutes before she was escorted out on the arm of a friend. A new date of execution was now scheduled for Tuesday the 30th of April. Then, as her son awaited his fate in Durham jail, Bainbridge's mother received a letter from a woman who signed herself a good friend. She claimed she was a married woman who had lent him the money and that Bainbridge was innocent of the murder. However, despite the circumstances, she was not prepared to testify in court. "I cannot come forward as I am in a pretty high position and my husband would do something terrible to the children and myself." Following the dismissal of his appeal, Bainbridge wrote to his solicitor, William McKeague. "Not once did I dream that the result could be as disastrous as this through my refusing to implicate the lady from whom I had borrowed that confounded money. He wrote a number of farewell letters from the condemned cell. To his soldier friend who had received the money through the post, he apologised that he was caught up in the whole sorry situation, and to his commander at the barracks he again claimed his innocence, adding that his time with the Durham Light Infantry had given him the courage to face what he must face on that fateful morning. His fiancée stood by him as he was lodged in the death cell, telling a Sunday newspaper that she believed he was innocent and that they would be married if he was acquitted. There was to be no reprieve, and a few days before the execution was due, the Home Office notified the prison governor that the law was to take its course. Thursday the 9th of May was a warm spring morning. A large crowd gathered outside the prison, and to prevent wealthy abolitionist Mrs. van der Els and her supporters from driving her Rolls Royce and van with a loudspeaker to the prison gates, the police had blocked the road with a large lorry. On the stroke of 8 o'clock, the hangman entered the cell. Pierpoint strapped Bainbridge's wrist behind his back and led him onto the scaffold. Seconds later, the trapdoor opened and Bainbridge dropped 6'4" to his death. Was Bainbridge guilty as charged? The trial judge certainly believed that the evidence presented in court was compelling enough, and in rejecting his appeal, it was noted that the panel of judges believed there was no doubt at all in the prisoner's guilt. Did his refusal to name the anonymous witness cost him his life? Was the mysterious woman really so scared of coming forward she was prepared to see an innocent man hang? Or was she just part of an elaborate lie to help save Bainbridge from the gallows? If she was indeed real, his chivalrous act of keeping her name out of the press saw him take her identity to the grave. You'll be watching another episode of Tales from the Hangman's Record. Until the next time, thank you and goodbye.